C for children.
Gotcha.
Long time no see.
Oh, you know, we should need to stop meeting like this.
Yes,
If we'd
absolutely.
have done this out in Northview, we would have been in good shape.
I'm gonna sit right there.
Oh, you're sitting here? Okay. Well, they got us hemmed in, don't they? I'm gonna scoot down a little bit, Ozzy.
Sure.
Scoot the cameras back, Rob. Did I mess it up?
Oh, good water. So dry this time of year. Hi,
It is.
how are you?
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you? I'm Angie.
Oh, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Carol saying something. Moving everybody's coat.
All right, let's go.
I was never.
Good afternoon.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm glad we are all here. I call to order the February 25th, 2016 special public meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone tonight and ask you to please silence your cell phones and electronic devices. And please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Wagner, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bates,
Present.
Ms. Bolton, Mrs. Hoffman, Ms. Jones, Mr. Manera, Mr. Nelms, President Copeland Dansby.
Present. Well, good evening again. Tonight we have a pretty short agenda. We have a presentation related to preschool promise, and we have a nice group of folks here, so we will ask for introductions when you get started. In fact, let's do that first. Let's do introductions, and then I'll sort of frame the conversation for us.
Perfect. Okay. Why don't we start with introductions?
My name's David Vance, Cincinnati City Council. I'm sorry? And I'm also a co-chair of the Preschool Promise Initiative.
Hi, I'm Ozzy Davis. I'm a co-chair for Preschool Promise.
Stephanie Bird, Executive Director of United Way Success by 6.
Angie Good, 4C for Children.
Leslie Maloney with the Hale U.S. Bank Foundation.
Cheryl Rose, I'm the co-chair for the Cincinnati Preschool Promise.
Greg Landsman with Every Child Capital and the Preschool Promise.
Excellent. Yeah, we could go around. We can go around off the name tag.
All right, Jennifer Wagner, Treasurer of the District.
Mary Ronan, Superintendent.
I'm Erica Copeland Dansby, President of the School Board.
And Melanie Bates, Vice President.
Steve Colton, School Board Member.
Carolyn Jones, School Board Member.
Ma'am, who was?
Lisa Hoffman, School Board Member. Phyllis Davis, the Board Administrative Assistant.
Excellent. Well, tonight we are going to have again a presentation and conversation along with Cincinnati Preschool Promise, and just in my brief conversations with some of the leadership of the group this week, I think there are a couple things that we want to mention so that we can sort of frame the conversation as we hear your presentation and then hopefully have a little bit of dialogue. And so tonight we're going to talk about Preschool Promise in general, sort of a general overview and how it will work in that. We're going to maybe discuss a bit about accessibility and participation. Also, maybe some suggested ideas or that around the governance structure. And then any opportunity for collaboration or benefit with the district is what I'm told. I also know there's a little bit of context from Board Member Hoffman, as she is the liaison to your steering committee. And I thank you publicly for attending all the meetings and being very present there as a representative of the board. And so there are a couple things that you might want to mention.
Yeah, sure. And Assistant Superintendent Broadnax also is our representative from CPS too, so she's been very involved as well. And so from the steering committee point of view, in our last meeting, we talked at the steering committee for CPP around 3 important questions: funding, governance, and quality. And then coming out of that meeting, a survey was sent to all steering committee members to get input from all the steering committee members on those important topics. I let CPP know that I couldn't fill that out because no individual board member can speak for the board, and then brought it to the board to ask, what should we do? We want to provide input on these really important questions. And so that's how we came to the needing to have a public meeting today to hear a little bit about some framing from CPP about those questions and what input they need from us, and then an opportunity for us as steering committee members to provide some input.
Okay, good. Well, I know there's a lot of information to share, but I do want us to remain in the context of the 4 items that I mentioned previously, and then the fact that there's a survey and you eagerly want to participate in that as our liaison and needing to ask some questions, particularly related to those 3 items of funding, governance, and quality. Okay, so I really want us to hang there. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start, and do I need to actually talk into the mic, or can I just? Okay, good. Thank you. And thank you for the context, and thank you for allowing us to be here. I would start by saying that this is a very dynamic situation. There are a lot of moving parts as we make our path down to what I hope is a successful creation of the preschool promise. And one of the things that I think that was a part of our questionnaire that Elisa mentioned was funding. And I just want to say at the outset, that is a topic that we are not planning to discuss this evening. There are a number of things that we would like to discuss, but because there are so many moving parts, we're really looking at information as it's evolving. We've got the RAND study that has yet to be completed. We expect it by the end of March, and hope that we will have enough information at that point to really delve deeply into the funding of this important program and how it will benefit all of our partners financially. Will be more clear as we get that information back. I know that you all have engaged Parthenon to do the efficiency study or an analysis of the district, and so that's an important piece for you. And then we've got a steering committee who participated in a survey. Elisa was not able to complete that, and so we're here today, but while we've gotten feedback from them, we have a retreat with them in March to really kick the tires of their responses, this plan, and whatever other information we have at that time, so that we can come back with a really solid set of recommendations. And so one of the things that I know is probably most in question is the funding mechanism. And so while I think there are a lot of questions, and certainly it's core to what the ultimate plan looks like, we can't really delve into that at this point. But what we can tell you is a lot about how we think this will work, what the benefits we believe there are to Cincinnati Public Schools, what our position on quality is, and it's our current thinking. It's our plan as we know it today, and it will be informed by the additional information that will come from those various pieces of work that are outstanding. So, I mean, just in the way of introduction, this work is not new. I mean, Success by 6 has been around for a long time. It's building on what we've been doing for 13 years almost. We have informed what we'll talk about today through conversations with our steering committee, our partners, Community Action Agency, CPS, United Way have all been involved and active in informing where we are today. We have the work of RAND that's ongoing. We've gotten little snippets of information along the way that have allowed us to kind of begin to solidify our thinking. But we've also had an economic impact study done by the University of Cincinnati that tells a pretty compelling story that the return on investment, based on what we know the benefits to be at least, is significant, as much as $12,000 and change for every child who participates in preschool. And so we know each year, and so we know that there is, from that information, a lot that we can begin to say about how this needs to be structured. In terms of how it will, well, let me just say, the one thing that has been consensus in all of the conversations that we've had is that we have to do this as a partnership. We will not be successful at all if we try and go this alone, nor will we be doing what we think is appropriate for this community and really understanding the needs of the district, making sure that the district's needs, however that manifests itself in the fall of 2016, are able to be met. And we think there's a smart way to go about that and working together. We cannot cross the T, dot the I's on what that plan is, but I think if we work together, we're smart enough and intent enough, and I think interested enough in the well-being of our children and our community to work together to make this happen in a way that benefits the district and also benefits all of the 9,000 children in this community who are 3 and 4 years of age who may not have an opportunity for preschool. And so with that context, I think, what we'd like to do is talk about, how it will work. Just to start out, I mean, the way this is structured, there will be 2 basic directions in which the funding will flow. Once we determine what that public funding source will be, we anticipate that there will be tuition credits that will go to the participating programs that are going to be, they will be scaled to the income of the individual who is receiving the tuition credit and the level of quality that they choose for their family. The other direction that funds will go will be to programs for quality improvement. The level of quality improvement will be based on where they start. For those programs that are high quality and are actively involved in receiving tuition credits, they'll get a quality improvement based on what their needs are as an already high quality program. But we also know that there are programs who aren't there yet who need assistance in getting there. And so having quality improvement dollars go to those programs so they can actively participate with tuition credits as they become high quality is an important component of this, largely because they are an important part of the landscape. We have quality deserts in our community where little quality exists or no quality exists. And in order to fill the needs of the families that are in those communities, we have to help those programs get to a higher level of functioning, meeting the standards of Step Up to Quality and our expectations for the outcomes that we'd like children in those programs to have. And so that would be the second funding stream. We believe that this will be set up as a sliding scale with the vast majority of children, or all children up to 200% of the federal poverty level being covered, and with families after that receiving something, but certainly not at the level that families who are in that window and that with that level of need would receive. There are a lot of questions that we have heard over the various conversations we've had, but particularly with providers, about parents and the need for parents to be engaged, the need for parents to understand how this works, the need to make sure that enrollment is possible in the communities where we want families to be standing in line most. And so whatever supports are needed in order to make sure that we are getting the word out and enrolling parents and addressing what supports they might need in order to enroll and feel comfortable that the children's needs are going to be met are part of the funds that we believe will need to be in place for meeting the needs of parents and families. All of our relationships will be governed by provider agreements. And we've had conversations in our steering committee meetings about the level of quality, but beyond the level of quality, we'll have specific expectations of how providers participate, what the expectations are in terms of how they manage the funds that come into their facilities. We are looking at blending the public funds that come from our community with existing funds that are coming into our community from the state and from the federal government through Head Start or other means. And so it will be up to the providers to help kind of moderate that, to make sure that they are not receiving funds that are in excess of their charges, and that if they've got a family that is eligible for other resources, that those resources are brought to bear in addition to what they'd be receiving from the preschool promise. So that's in general what we're anticipating in terms of how it works. And I'm going to pause and see if any of my partners here want to comment on that aspect of how it will work. Comments or other?
Yeah, I would just say one of the things that RAND will do, in addition to sort of a landscape analysis, where are all of the preschools now, which ones are quality rated, what level of quality, and where kids are. There's some 9,000 3 and 4-year-olds in the city. They'll cost out a series of scenarios of how this could be done, maybe 5 or 6 scenarios. I believe all of them, certainly the one that we're focused on, would have all children at 200% of poverty or below fully covered. Having leveraged state and federal dollars, they would be fully covered, full day, if that's what the parent were to choose, and then a sliding scale after that. The first budget will most likely be something that, from 200 to 300%, maybe 60% of the tuition, and that's 80% of the kids, 300% or below, and then above that, sort of 30, 10, 5, so that, again, as Stephanie mentioned, the vast majority of the resources go to those who are at or below 200% of poverty, fully covering tuition.
So the other thing that's important to this work is that we're paying attention to how well this is working. We will be funding this through public dollars, and so having a value on quality improvement is critical, making sure that as this is operational, the staff who are on board are trained in quality improvement techniques and can monitor how we're doing in enrolling families, how we're doing in actually making payments, what customer service and satisfaction measures need to be in place to make sure that the operation is streamlined and working effectively and meeting the needs of families. Let me talk a little bit about quality. The way we anticipate the quality grants working is to assure that the programs that are operating in our community are able to elevate the level of quality largely as it relates to the staff that are employed, the wages that are paid to staff, particularly in those programs that are offered through our community child care and private preschool providers. We know that there is a significant gap in wages between those providers who are offering services privately in the community and the public school district, and even within the private community there's variation. But when we look at most of the data around child care, if not all of it, it shows that the child care community wages are disproportionately low, given that we are asking them to be educational environments. And so as we provide the quality improvement dollars and the tuition credits, they'll be scaled in a way that allows the programs to begin to pay more competitive wages and recruit and retain staff in a more consistent fashion, which stabilizes the programs and provides children a more consistent experience. That's critical to quality and a major issue that we've heard as we've talked to providers and as we've even listened to what others are doing across the country. Stabilizing and equalizing salaries is an important issue. We're looking at having quality, the quality improvement dollars tied to the level of quality that's available. Our bias is towards high quality. Our steering committee conversations have been around whether it's 3, 4, and 5 or 2+ and 3, 4, and 5. 2+ being an evolving opportunity for programs who now can sign up to be a 2 but have a 6 to 12 month window before they have to apply to be a 3, and in which case they become more highly rated. And so we're working to apply our quality improvements in a way that encourages programs to move to a level 3 as quickly as possible. Our state mandates will mandate that all programs are rated by 2020, and they're highly rated by 2025, and so we are riding the wave of the resources that are coming to communities from the state to help programs get to quality. Accessibility and participation. The biggest issue that we see in terms of accessibility is that we have more children who need the services than we have resources to pay for those services. And so obviously the tuition credits are intended to allow many children who have not had services eligibility, being a part of that, or insufficient funding, as is the case with Head Start, to receive services. And so we believe that the tuition credit will allow us to, and particularly it being universal, will allow children who to date have not been eligible or not had sufficient funding in coming into the community to be served to actually participate in this program. Greg, it looks like you want to say something.
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. Anybody else? I feel like I'm on a monologue, and this is not a monologue.
I was just-
Johnny
I was
Carson
very
no longer
engaged.
lives, unfortunately. One of the things that I know is important is identifying where families are. One of my greatest fear, and I think this is shared by others, is that as we turn the lights on to this opportunity, that we'll have families who are more at the 200% of the federal poverty level and up in line more quickly than families who are in that 0 to 200. And so we're going to have to mine existing databases where we know families are to connect with them if they're in that 0 to 200% of the federal poverty level, so they end up being first in line and can enroll ahead of, if possible, other families, because that is the population who needs to be enrolled. That is the population who, when we see outcomes, move more quickly than other children. And so we need to make sure that we're using things like the Imagination Library database that's being developed over at Children's Hospital to identify these families, because that is the target population who's participating in the Imagination Library. We've also got a mobile unit that will be driving throughout our community, getting the word out about the Preschool Promise, but also will convert to an enrollment station that will allow families to enroll, so we can be over on the west side of town and in Fay Apartments and in those communities where we know children can benefit from the services and have not had that opportunity, so that there's a way for them to get engaged without it being complex and complicated. Pause. Any other comments? Yeah? Okay. Governance and management. That's a significant issue. We polled our steering committee about this, and the vast majority, if not unanimous response, was that this would be set up as a separate 501c3 operating under the jurisdiction of the taxing authority, with the actual establishment of that group being under the responsibility of that taxing authority. Appointments to the board, we believe, need to be very diverse, representing the diversity of our community. Heavy emphasis on having parents engaged and actively involved in how this operates, but looking at providers also having a role at the table. In addition, providers having a provider advisory board that would oversee the operation of this for providers. It would be anywhere from 11 to 15 people, but these are kind of our current thinking. We don't know actually what that will be until we get to the point of having it appointed, but recommendations from the steering committee will land around 11 to 15 people. And having a significant inclusion of Cincinnati Public Schools and other providers is going to be critical to making sure that this is operating in a way that meets your needs and is favorable and doing as we believe it's going to do. You can see the organizational structure. The intent is to, once the ballot initiative passes, the taxing authority would hand those resources off to a newly created 501c3 overseen by this board that I just described. The three primary roles of the...
Quick time out.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah.
I didn't know this. Leslie gave me the whole stack of handouts. So
Oh, I am so sorry.
Cheryl bottlenecked it.
I'm just assuming that you all are following along. I'm so sorry. It would help to see what I'm talking about, though. Yeah, wow, you are. You guys had good teachers. So I'm going to stop. Should you want to catch up and? No? Okay, all right. Okay. And so this isn't a monologue. I'm going to ask one of my partners to go through this structure.
Oh,
Why
sure.
don't you, Greg?
Yeah, so the This is on page 3. And this is, again, the current thinking and what we hope to get some feedback and input from you all on is the taxing entity would establish this independent entity accountable to the taxing authority with, as Stephanie mentioned, 11 to 15 members of the board with a staff that supports their work to ensure that the funds are distributed with fidelity and transparency. The quality improvement grants to providers and tuition assistance also to providers to offset the cost entirely for all children at or below 200% of poverty, and then on a sliding scale above that. There would be some competitively bid contracts to manage the data system and enrollment, income verification, those kinds of things. And you can see it's a small group, somebody who's leading the charge in terms of enrollment and outreach, somebody who's working with providers and the provider advisory group, and then somebody who's managing the data system and finances. So that's the current thinking, and all of the dollars would flow through these provider agreements, and the board, would be tasked with managing the new funding source alone. So no other entities governing authority would be compromised in any way. So if all of the providers, including Cincinnati Public Schools, have their own governing authority, that wouldn't change. This would simply be to manage these funds and to ensure that they're managed effectively and with fidelity and transparency.
I mentioned that our relationship with our participating providers will be overseen by agreements, and I won't go through the details of what the agreements include. It's a sensitive issue in that we don't want to tell providers how to run their businesses. They're individual businesses. CPS has its own business model, but there are some provisions that we think are important to making sure that the operation of the Preschool Promise is consistent with what we believe is good for children as it relates to how expulsions are handled, how meeting the needs of dual language learners is handled, and making sure that, as I mentioned earlier, wages for those staff are handled in a way that over time elevates the field. Because I think part of the issue we have with outcomes today is that we have two different fields. We have what has been seen as the child care field, and Angie, you do this every day, so you can elbow me if I'm doing this wrong, or if you have a different opinion, or jump in. And then we have the professional field, and we need children to be in a professional environment if they are outside of their home. No question, it is our responsibility as a community, if we are paying for children to be in any way in a program that's outside of their home, it's got to be able to meet the needs of that child from a developmental standpoint and from the standpoint of giving them access to a curriculum and staff who are going to be able to get them there. And so those are the kinds of things that we believe need to be in these programs, but they need help. This is a field that has been woefully neglected by the state, almost pushed into business because of the need for parents to go to work, and then not supported in a way that allows them to do so in a way that gets outcomes that we know are good for children and allows the staff, the very staff in those programs, to not require the benefits themselves. Many of the child care workers in this community rely on public assistance. That's not the kind of professional environment that we need long term. This is our opportunity to begin to move the needle in a more positive direction. Benefits to Cincinnati Public Schools, you all are going to be able to judge the benefits better than any of us. You do this every day, and it's your business. As we look at where this is positioned today, there are some key areas that we think are beneficial to CPS as it relates to freeing up funds that would have been used to fund preschool that could now be used for your K-12 mission, because money coming through the Preschool Promise and this new funding source will now be able to cover those costs. It may not be dollar for dollar, but a substantial amount of resources can now be devoted to preschool that would allow you, conceivably, the Title I funds that you get today that's funding preschool could be turned back to your K-12 purposes. Over time, We believe that a child who is ready for kindergarten, and this has kind of been the Success by Six proposition since, I've been doing this work, a child who's ready for kindergarten is going to be a lot less costly to the district than a child who's not. And so the benefit through cost reduction of that child not needing remediation or being retained or special education will be immediate cost savings to the district that I think will be beneficial and significant over time. This will allow the district to expand. It is an outstanding program. It gets great results. It needs to expand. This would be an immediate source of funds to allow you to achieve your expansion plans, and hopefully in the areas where it's critically needed, in some of the communities where children need it most and where we have limited quality available today. But it is important that we look at this as a mixed market because families have different needs, and while the district, certainly has a product that many families want and are using, and it certainly can expand. There are some families who need services that go well beyond what the district can offer, and so being able to offer a plan that is both inclusive of the district but also inclusive of the needs of families who need all day, all year levels of service is important. And in not doing that, we will, if we don't do that, I think we'll have an issue of excluding a significant population of providers who are largely minority, African American, and as I mentioned, not able to participate in this work at a level that would get children where we need them to be. And so over time, as we create a more robust market, those benefits accrue to Cincinnati Public Schools because children will come to school ready. Teachers will be able to do what teachers want to do, and that's teach, and classrooms will be managed in a way that allows the outcomes that teachers are looking for to be achieved. And so that's my end of the portion of the program. I'm going to ask Greg if he'll talk about the urgency, or Cheryl, or Vice Mayor Mann, please.
I do have one thing to add because my focus has been very much around the economic development aspects of this, and I don't know those of you who've seen this, but the UC Economics Center did do some research. Back in 2014, they released a report, and it's very interesting in that it demonstrates the benefits that accrue over a period of time and over the lifetime of that child. And I think specifically as it pertains to CPS, those benefits per enrollee in reduction in school costs is estimated to be $2,060 per enrollee. And then a benefit of decreased cost of hiring and keeping teachers due to student behavior is an additional $378. So that's per their study, which I think is really compelling. Just a note on that.
So on the why now and urgency, there's just a few buckets here. One is obviously it's a presidential election and high voter turnout, 75% in the city in 2012, and with the right new money requests, there's strong voter support. Obviously significant community will, and you can see sort of what that looks like. There's the ongoing cost of not doing this, which thousands of kids continuing to begin school unprepared, good paying jobs not being created, parents not being able to return to the workforce, the long and short-term costs to taxpayers and philanthropy continue to persist. And so I think as we were talking about this and getting prepared for it, there's a sort of an emerging optimism that there's real promise in us all working together, and what that could look like, we don't know exactly yet. Obviously, there's still, as Stephanie mentioned, a lot of details with RAND and other conversations, additional conversations with you all. But the value in pulling together a group of us to think about what the most ideal scenario would be has a lot of energy around it, and hopefully that's something that's appealing to you all, that would allow us to sit down and look at the numbers and say, okay, the most perfect ideal situation would be this kind of partnership. And so that's sort of where we conclude.
Please.
The spirit with which I come here today is first to thank you and your predecessors for educating my 3 children, my oldest grandchild, and you are now educating my 4 remaining grandchildren. And I feel so grateful that they are students in the system and that you're doing such a great job. And I anticipate that we can find a way to work together that makes this wonderful vision for our, those who are not yet in kindergarten a reality, and do so in a way that's positive for all of us. So we look forward to working together with you to develop a common vision that makes sense for the children in this community. Thank you for the opportunity.
What's coming around is kind of an outline of what a working group might work on, and several of us, Emily Lewis, who's out enjoying her new baby, Jen and Mary and Cheryl met back in January to begin to think through what would our working together look like. And so if it is the pleasure of the board to form a working group, some of the things that could be addressed are, what are our common goals in working together? How do we look at growth in terms of the district's needs? I know you have an expansion plan to get to 1,500 more children over the course of the next 5 years. How do we make that happen? What is the framework for how the tuition credits are paid? We know that a good percentage of the children will come to CPS. Having a per-child tuition credit paid on a per-month basis makes no sense. So how does that then get converted to a payment based on the projected number of children that come to CPS? All of those details for what the financial model is, how that is implemented in terms of an actual mechanism for payment, and what the actual expansion plan looks like in terms of where programs go, are things that I think this working group could work together and come back to a larger group with some specific recommendations. Because again, we're getting more information every day. We'll get a lot in March, and all of that will need to inform our final recommendations, but it would be, I think, in the spirit of a true partnership, for us to begin to think about how we do this together, send a message to our community that this can be done, and that we have the will to make it happen, and that we've got a group who is actively engaged in giving us the details as to how this will work. So that's kind of what the purpose of this outline is. We have the work plan for that group.
Well, given that information, as we kind of open up for dialogue, I'm wondering if Board Member Hoffman, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, I'm not putting you on the spot, but, just because of the frame of this having to do with needing to complete the survey, and does this.
Yeah, so I think that was the initial impetus, right? We need to provide you all with the same
Right.
feedback as steering committee members. So I think I would turn it over to the CPP folks for the specific questions you have at this time. I know that we have a lot of questions, I think, that eventually we want to ask you all, that it sounds like once the RAND study comes back, you'll be in a better position to start answering. But at this time, there was a series of questions you were asking for input from steering committee members on. And so I think it would be best if maybe you were posing some of those to us to get our input on, and we can go from there.
So the three basic questions were what the prevailing opinion was on the funding source. Those options being, as you know, a property tax, a sales tax, and an earnings tax. The second question was around quality, and at what level of quality do we want the tuition credits to be applied, whether that was at a 3, 4, or 5, or at a 2+, or all programs, regardless of quality. And then the third was around management and governance and management. And the general question was, with a lot of background information being provided, do you agree, what is your perspective on this being a separate 501c3 with an independent board? As I mentioned earlier, I don't think we are at a point of talking about the funding option. We got responses. We also have a lot more information to get from the RAND study, and we're having a lot of conversations within the community around what an appropriate funding mechanism is. And so we've gotten feedback. We'll talk about it when our retreat happens in March. But I don't think that's a question we want to pose to the board at this point, because I know you all have your own information that you have to gather. But with regards to quality, I know that's an issue. In the meetings that we had that were convened by Kent and by John, it's come up. And so, where we have landed based on the results of the survey, and again, this has to come to our steering committee for, final decisions and recommendations, is that a program that is a 2 on its way to a 3 would be able to participate in the program with tuition credits coming to those programs and with a heavy dose of quality improvement dollars to help them get to that 3. And to the extent that that 3 was because of them not getting to a 3 was because of staff not being able to attract and retain staff, we're working with UC and Mount St. Joe and all of the schools that train teachers to begin to look at the teacher pipeline issues, so that we're beginning to create a more robust pipeline and then have an ability to pay salaries that get them in the field and keep them in the field. So that's kind of where we landed, a 2+ for the tuition credits, but quality improvement resources to all programs, so that those who aren't rated have the opportunity to get rated, and those who are would be able to enhance what they're doing. But this isn't a perpetual thing. If a program says they want to participate and they don't do what they are supposed to do, they will no longer get the quality improvement dollars, and they'll never get tuition credits. And so this is not just a trust me, we'll do it. It is, what is the plan, and how are you doing on the plan? And then if you don't get there, and it's through no fault of your own, we may give you some, and these are all agreement issues, but this is not a let's take the money and not do what we're supposed to do. So that's kind of where we were on quality. So I'll just pause and see what your questions are or concerns about that.
Ms. Bolton.
Are we working on the 5-star piece, or when you say 3 or 2+, are we moving to that 5? Okay, so
Yes.
I mean, just as one individual board member and just thinking about it politically, I think it would be more helpful to say that it's going to be, we're going to subsidize, if you will, or provide subsidy for those places that have a 3 already, and then concentrate more dollars going into the other ones, the 2+, whatever, for that professional development, doing the other kinds of things. I think that has more credibility when you go out into the public, that we're going to be subsidizing quality, plus this other bucket of money is going to be used to move people.
Right.
So that you're not still moving less quality folks, at the same time you're subsidizing.
I see what you're saying.
I just think that's an easier sell. I see the purpose of doing the 2+, it makes sense, but I just think that from that, I think you'd be able to communicate that better to the community, that this is, these are really, we're subsidizing already established quality organizations.
Ms. Hoffman.
I would just add to what Ms. Bolton is saying, is that we also want to make sure that we are subsidizing what we know has the most impact for kids. And so if I think I'm right that all the data shows that it has to be at least a 3 in order to get the outcomes that we want for kids. And I think what Stephanie, you talked about earlier about how we're using public tax dollars, and so we're going to be constantly looking and evaluating what's working, what's not, what's working for families, what's not, what's working, et cetera.
Yes.
We also are going to need to be evaluating what's working for the kids. And if we're going to be pulling that data, I think we're setting ourselves up to not be very successful if we know that the kids coming out of a 2 are likely not going to be performing at the level we want them to. And so I just think from the get-go, we want to make sure we're investing our money where we know we're going to see results for kids, which is at the 3+. And then, like Ms. Bolton is saying, investing in the actual centers to get them to a 3.
Okay, Ms. Bates.
Yes, I wanted to kind of preface this. I had been part of the state board that first authorized charter schools, and this in the state of Ohio with some optimism. And unfortunately, I'm hearing some of the things that I heard back then with the K-12 charter schools. And right now, a couple of things that come to mind are that we are looking at a gap that exists currently with the community providers and CPS and the slots that are available and the number of children who are out there. Well, I mean, and that's, that's a reality. We have to facilitate in some way through our expansion. Certainly CPS can't assume the entire expansion unless we get a huge influx of money, because we need facilities, and the materials and everything else that goes along with preschools and any school actually. So, kind of to make a long story short, some of the concerns I have are similar to what evolved with the charter schools. It sounds that this gap, it would be very tempting to close this gap through private operators who would come in, and I can see them operating at the lowest possible level to obtain the money, and that's something that I'm really concerned with. Another thing is that I know that everybody's nodding their heads. If they don't comply with our standards, then we're going to close them. Well, we found with our charter schools, that's really, really hard to do. And when they are closed, then they want to come to Cincinnati Public, and we might not at that point be able to accept those children, and that's a difficulty as well. So bringing that experience of the early development of charter schools and seeing the parallel with this startup and knowing the pitfalls, that's some issues that I really, really want to work through that are very serious. And we don't want to create a parallel system that obviously isn't working now and is turned the state of Ohio frankly into an oligarchy.
Yeah, so this is where I think the quality rating system plays such an important role, because unlike K-12, these schools aren't on the same or held to the same levels of the same level of standards. Whereas in this case, they would have to be at a high level of quality in order to receive the tuition assistance. And to receive quality improvement grants, they'd obviously have to be in the process of getting to quality. And it wouldn't be shutting someone down, it's just that they don't receive the funding, which is different than the existing sort of K-12 charter situation. I mean, they continue to get funding.
But it would be from the preschool promise.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're, this is, as I mentioned earlier, we are not interested in working with programs who aren't interested in the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And this is all about making sure that kids have the best possible start and are ready for kindergarten. If a program is trying and has barriers that are created because funding has not been made available to the child care community, we can help with that. But they also will have an obligation to make progress, and that includes child outcomes. And so we will be looking at how they're doing. We can't expect that a child who's coming from, because families will choose where they want their children to go, who's coming from a program that's not receiving tuition credits but getting quality improvement dollars to get the same outcomes as a child who's in a 3, 4, or 5-star program. And so, but we'll know that that is indeed the case. But our goal is to move those programs up so that there are more 3, 4s, and 5s, and over time we'll not have the poorly rated, non-rated programs. The state's saying they can't operate anyway with state money after 2020. We're accelerating that plan, but giving them support that they've not had to get there.
Okay. Ms. Bolton.
Just a question. One of the first things that was mentioned was the 9,000 children in the city, and then we talked in terms of the 200% poverty, and below those would be the first targets, and they would be fully funded. Do we know how many children there are within that 9,000 that are 200% poverty and lower?
I believe it's close to 60 to 70% of that number. That's what Randall, that's the second phase of RAND, will give you the exact numbers on how many 3 and 4-year-olds there are, how many are at 200%. If I remember correctly, looking at census data, it's close to 60 or 70% of our kids are at 200% of poverty or below. 80% are at 300% of poverty or below.
So can I just go follow up with that?
Sure.
So then if we know we have more students who need access than we have providers at the get-go, how do we then prioritize who's going to have access to these dollars? And will that be made clear from the beginning to the families who are applying? You know, so if I'm applying for my own children and there's other kids who clearly have a higher need, do I then get nothing and they get everything? Because I'm totally cool with that. I'm just saying, how are we then prioritizing and making sure that it's clear to the public that when we say universal, there's an asterisk that we don't have enough quality right now to actually be universal?
That is $1 million question, and I think that is a question that we have to work with the provider community to answer in terms of coming up with a ramp-up plan that allows us to measure, to contract with providers in a way that we're getting the highly rated programs on board first and working with the ones that are on the cusp right after that. We have a fair number of 2s that will be required to apply for a 3, and with that, we'll be working with them to get them to be a 3 as quickly as possible. The other thing that, and this is not the answer to your question, but we have a county-wide set of providers that would be available to families. So for those families who are not looking for care in the city of Cincinnati because they work out in the county or beyond Hamilton County, they would take their tuition credit with them. And so it gives us a broader pool of highly rated programs to work from, but we have to balance that with the landscape data to see exactly what we do have and where, and then work with the providers who are on the cusp to get them up the ladder as quickly as we can. It's a healthy tension to a certain extent to have more demand than you have supply, but only to a certain extent, and so we have to really strike that balance. And so I cannot answer that question any more clearly until we know exactly who we have and who's going to be willing to participate and how we scale up the ones that are 2s. And I don't know if you can address any more about that, Angie, but.
So I don't know specific to City of Cincinnati, but within our region, we have around 75 to 80 3, 4, and 5-star rated programs. We have another probably 100 1- and 2-star rated programs. We currently have a set group of programs who are 2-star rated that we are targeting, very specific in partnership with Success by 6, to move them to a 3 in a quick fashion. And just over the past 9 months, we've worked with 7 programs within our region, and 5 of them have already registered for that higher rating. 2 of them will register by the end of March. And so I feel like with the financial support of Success by 6, we've been able to create a model that is individualized for all of those programs, because each individual program has its own culture and has its unique set of needs. And one of the challenges is that all of the state seems to want to just kind of provide a blanket statement of fix, and that doesn't always work, because just like children are individuals, so are programs. And so our job at 4C is to work with those individual programs, determine those individual needs, and with the financial support of Success by 6, meet those needs and then push them forward to that higher quality.
And those numbers do not include CPS. So if you add the CPS programs to it, it's a much larger pool with a broader geographic spread, which we would always see those as high quality, rated or not. I know many of your programs will be going through the rating system. God love you, Andrea. It's going to be a challenge, but it's important to have that stamp of approval, although we've known that the ODE programs are not, most of the ODE programs are already high quality.
Well, I think this is great conversation related to the quality issue that you mentioned. The only thing that we haven't talked about, I just want to make sure, are there questions or do you have other feedback related to management and governance? That was the third point that you mentioned.
And so, I mean, the question there it was basically, once this is approved by the voters, by whatever taxing authority, is responsible. The current thinking is that we would have that money transferred to a independent entity set up as a 501c3 who would oversee would provide the governance of the 501c3, who would be responsible for the day-to-day operation. In the financial management and administration, the enrollment of families, and then also in the actual payment of the tuition credits. And so the governing body itself would be appointed by that taxing authority. We believe that it has to be diverse and representative of the community, with the parent and provider voice actively involved and at the table, but also with an advisory board of parents and providers who are really looking at the details of those operations. And so that's kind of the thinking around the governance and administration of it. And actually the roles are contracting with providers, customer service, enrollment, and then financial management and administration. Yes.
So my understanding, even from the previous meeting, is that while providers are going to be held accountable by this independent board, the providers maintain their independence.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How does that work?
So
I'm just trying to, certainly we want to maintain our independence, and I remember we had that discussion months ago, but I'm not sure about the accountability if you're going to have the providers remain independent. How are you going to, is it simply the control of the purse strings, or?
Yeah, it's like would be like any other funding source that the provider receives. So that when the provider gets funding through Head Start or state child care voucher, there are certain expectations, but that's it. I mean, in terms of oversight, it's as it relates to that funding.
And I know this is sacrilegious, but because I know how you feel about it. But the financial piece of this, which we're not talking about, begins to be incredibly prohibitive from a standpoint of 3- and 4-year-olds. Just the sheer numbers and the amount. And so I'm wondering if there's any issue about only 4-year-olds. And if there's also an issue as to how many dollars per child are you actually anticipating?
So that's the heart of the RAND study that
Yeah.
we're longing for, because it speaks to the thing that they're doing that is really helpful is they're looking at what dollars are coming into the community now, whether it's federal or state, really federal through the state, and for what children, and what is the gap, what is the cost of a quality program. They estimate that to be anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000 per child. And if you blend that with other funds that some children will have, then you get a difference. Then we've got the issue of knowing that, what do we consider an appropriate tuition credit that allows programs to address salaries for teachers who need a higher salary in order to do the job that we're asking them to do. So those are kind of the factors within the equation, but we don't have all of the numbers to calculate it.
I will add that, based on the research that we've seen over time, and there's no perfect study that perfectly models this, but RAND is really going to help us assess that. But if you think about it, there are 3 sources of return for this dollar investment. And I think when you start to analyze it, from my standpoint, if you put $1 in, what we're seeing is the minimum return on that dollar is about $2.50 in present value terms. That's the minimum. That's Head Start. It actually scales up when you start to add things in, like the fact that there is a future earnings power of preschoolers. That is a remarkable number. And there's also a spillover effect from having more skilled workers in our community, and you have a broader, more attractive base to draw companies to, and it raises the tide even twice what that earnings power of the individuals is. So it's a very powerful return on investment picture. And from my standpoint, that's where it just seems so compelling for us to figure out a way to make this happen.
I think that's really good, and I think prefacing it again by stating that we're also anxious to have the final
Absolutely.
return back.
Yes.
But, you know, given what you just mentioned, absolutely does make it very powerful. And that, so I don't know if there's anything else that we want to get to. Or have we covered your 3 points that you mentioned?
I
On
would
the
ask for
onset.
just a little clarification, just to make sure that I'm hearing it properly, that around the question of 2-star to 3-star, it sounds like the idea, and when I'm hearing this 3-star is really important because we know that's what works for kids, and finding a way to fund investing in centers for 2-star is the preferred.
Well, I think we all want the highest level of quality that we can get, you know, and then starting, you know, having some starting point. And so again, the 2+ versus the 3, and I think I heard, of course, the preference to go with the 3 at a minimum. So.
Can I ask one question around
Yes.
governance structure, and this would be more, I think, for Superintendent Ronan or Superintendent Broadnax, around when looking at this structure, and this is because they do the work here, of is there redundancy in having a structure like this kind of parallel to the structures set up in CPS? Or does this, having an outside body doing this work, could it make us more efficient? Like, could we take away some of the stuff that we're doing in CPS and give it to this other governance structure? So I think the worst case scenario is we end up being redundant in the work we're doing.
So there is redundancy with it. It's almost kind of the exact same buckets we currently have. I think the concern would be letting go of some of those pieces, whether it would be customer friendly for some of the parents that we serve. For example, enrollments, just for example, parents can come here, but a large part of our enrollments now are happening at the school.
Right.
Because it just makes sense that that's where our families are and siblings are. In terms of the quality piece, you know, we're the ones kind of working directly with the quality. Our family support assistants who are also assisting our families also help with some of the stuff up to quality. So certainly redundancy, not saying some things maybe couldn't, but I think that there would be some issue in the sense that it may not just also meet some of the other roles that we're playing.
I think that's probably a good feedback to, as this structure is being finalized, to look at and to meet with folks like Cheryl who are on the ground doing this, because the last thing we need is
Right.
2 systems doing the same thing parallel to each other.
This is, and to some extent, where we think there's a real value in having a small working group. I mean, we know that there's a ton of stuff that's still outstanding in terms of RAND and other conversations, but to being able to sit down and go through the numbers, what would be ideal? I mean, what is the best case scenario would be really helpful, I think.
Okay.
Again, I think when Member Hoffman talked about the priority and prioritizing, I did get a sense from you, Greg, that priority 1 is the 200% poverty, and I mean, that's that grouping
Up to.
yeah, so they would probably be the folks that would get that first dib, if I'm understanding, rightfully so.
Yeah, I mean, we would be actively seeking ways to enroll and engage those families first.
Well, very well. I think as we take a look at proposed next steps that you
Yes.
have listed here, I'm imagining that your leadership is in conversation with the leadership of the district as far as some level of a working group is concerned.
Yeah.
You guys are talking about that. So I would suggest those conversations continue, and then through our request from the board, we can get updates that way so that we all stay on the same page. Your bullet number 2, of course, we continue to say defining the financial requirements.
Sure.
And so as we gauge, the time period by which we're expecting those results back, it will be a great idea for us to come back together again.
Yeah.
I mean, that's inevitable. We'll have to definitely to do that. And then, the recommendations for implementation, including ramp up and the payment methodology, again, I believe is continued conversation.
Sure.
That we will need to engage with you in that. So originally, this seemed pretty cumbersome as to how we were going to get all the bodies in the room today, and so I'm really glad that we did.
Good job.
And I think this is a really great beginning to a conversation where we we know that we have to have some great level of partnership, and just as well as you all are looking forward to it, I am too. And I'm sure my colleagues are as well.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity. and
Absolutely.
thank you for creating a special
Yes.
forum for us to do this
And
today.
we'll do this again.
Good.
Very well.
Good.
So if there's no other business before the board, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you come on the meeting at City Hall?
Yeah, it wouldn't